I was never the kind of guy to pull surprises. I like things in order, my life compartmentalized, predictable. But that Tuesday, something made me want to break the routine. Maybe it was the sunshine cutting through the late winter gloom. Maybe it was the way Jenna kissed me that morning, quick, distracted, like I was a mild inconvenience instead of her husband of 7 years. Whatever it was, I found myself standing outside her office building at 11:47 a.m., holding a brown paper bag with her favorite Thai noodles and a bubble tea balanced on top. Jenna worked in a glass and steel tower in downtown Seattle. 6th floor, marketing division. I've been there plenty of times before, back when we still had lunch dates, before things got foggy. She used to light up when I came by. Now, not so much. Lately, she was always too busy or just stepping into a meeting. Still, I took the elevator up, rehearsing the line in my head. Just miss you at lunch, so I figured I'd bring it to you instead. Goo. Thoughtful. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing that pulled her back in. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when the elevator door slid open. Her office was half-wall glass. I could see everything inside before I even stepped out. Jenna was standing with her back to the hallway, and she wasn't alone. Michael Whitmore, her CEO, towered over her, one hand pressed to the small of her back, the other tangled in her hair as he kissed her. And not just a friendly peck. No, this was deep, slow, the kind of kiss that comes with promises made under dim lighting and silk sheets. She leaned into him, her hands clinging to the lapels of his charcoal suit. Her blouse was slightly askew, a few buttons undone, exposing the freckle just above her left breast, the one I used to kiss every night before bed. My stomach turned, but my body froze. I didn't make a sound. I didn't drop the food. I didn't even breathe. The elevator doors began to close. I stepped back just enough to let them. As I descended, I felt something inside me harden. I wasn't the screaming, glass-smashing kind. I wasn't going to barge in and shout accusations. No, this needed something more, something sharper. By the time I hit the lobby, the takeout was still in my hand, but the warmth was gone, just like the warmth between us. I didn't go home. I didn't even text her. I walked, miles through the city, past coffee shops and corporate towers, trying to stitch together the moment. Replay it from different angles, hoping there'd be another explanation. But no, I saw her. I saw them. And I saw the way she moaned into his mouth like she belonged to him. The betrayal hurt, yeah, but more than that, it pissed me off. She didn't even bother to hide it. Broad daylight, office hallway. What did that say about how little she thought of me? When I finally reached the waterfront, I sat on a bench and pulled out my phone. I went to her Instagram. Recent photo, her at the company retreat. Michael was in the background, smiling, casual hand on her shoulder. The caption? Productive days and unforgettable nights. Hashtag company culture, hashtag blessed. Unforgettable nights. The goal. My hand tightened around the phone. For a second, I wanted to throw it into the sound. Instead, I smiled. If she wanted unforgettable, I'd give her something she'd never forget. But it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be messy. It would be surgical. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. Not until I was ready. Not until I had a way to twist the knife just right. And I knew exactly where to start. Michael Whitmore had a daughter. I'd seen her once at a holiday event, stunning and sharp-eyed, standing away from the suits, sipping whiskey like she owned a room. She didn't seem the type to idolize Daddy. If anything, there was distance there. Rumor was they clashed constantly over her refusal to play the company heir. Her name was Allison, and she was about to become the centerpiece of my plan. A week later, I was standing under a cascade of warm lights in the grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel, sipping scotch and waiting for the next domino to fall. The company gala was one of those events where the air reeked of perfume, politics, and polished lies. The kind of evening where everyone wore designer masks with their tailored suits and tight dresses, all pretending their smiles were genuine and their lives untouched by scandal. I had never attended before, but this year I made sure my name was on the guest list, quietly through a friend in the marketing department. Jenna didn't know I was coming. She thought I was in Portland on business. I let her think that. I wasn't here for her. I was here for Allison Whitmore. She entered just past 8, right on cue, and turned more heads in 10 seconds in the open bar. She was wearing a deep green satin gown, high slit, low back, the color pulling attention to her pale skin and fiery auburn hair that cascaded in loose waves over one shoulder. A woman who commanded the room without needing to try. Michael trailed behind her, talking to board members, clearly proud of the accessory he never quite understood. Allison had that kind of beauty that didn't beg for approval. It dared you to say something stupid. I waited until she was alone, near the edge of the ballroom, staring into her cocktail like she wished it were something stronger. Vodka soda, I said, casually stepping beside her. Safe choice, but boring. She looked at me, one brow arching. I didn't realize I was here to impress. You aren't, I said, smiling. But you already are. That earned me a second glance. Measured, amused, not yet sold. Let me guess. You're in sales. Worse, I said, taking a sip of my scotch. Consulting. She rolled her eyes. Ah, the noble profession of telling everyone else what they're doing wrong. Only if they pay enough to hear it. I got a smirk. She turned to face me fully, arms folded just below her chest, and for the first time, I saw it up close. Those sharp eyes, flecked with gold. The same eyes as her father, but colder. Hungrier. I'm Luke, by the way, I said, extending a hand. She took it. Allison. And before you ask, yes, that Whitmore. I leaned in slightly, my voice low enough to cut through the surrounding noise. Actually, I wasn't going to ask, but I'll admit I'm surprised. By what? I expected his daughter to be a little more vanilla. Her smile was slow and dangerous. You'd be amazed what people expect of me. Most of the time, they're wrong. I like being wrong, I said, meaning every word. There was a charged pause between us. Not awkward, not forced. Electric. She held my gaze a little longer than necessary, her tongue flicking briefly against the inside of her cheek. I assume you're not just a party crasher, she said eventually. So what brings you here? Work? I could have lied, but something told me she'd see right through it. So I did what Jenna never did with me. I told the truth. Used to be my wife's world. She's in marketing. Jenna. Her brows flicked upward. Jenna. Tall, platinum blonde, surgically symmetrical. Wears too much perfume and not enough sense. I choked back a laugh. You know her? Unfortunately. We crossed paths. She always seemed well-fed. I coughed, nearly spilling my drink. That's one way to put it. Allison shrugged, her smirk never leaving. So you're married to the trophy wife, and here you are, talking to the boss's black sheep. Sounds risky. Only if someone finds out, I said, eyes narrowing slightly. Another long look passed between us, thicker now. There was heat rising beneath the playful tone, the beginnings of something unspoken and charged. Her eyes dropped briefly to my mouth before returning to my gaze. I don't do safe, Luke. I don't want safe. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The music shifted, jazzy and slow, the kind meant for swaying bodies and blurred intentions. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a card, and slipped it into my jacket pocket with a subtle brush of fingers that lingered just a moment too long. Text me tomorrow, she said, stepping back. Unless you're afraid of what might happen. I'm counting on it. She disappeared into the crowd, hips moving with casual confidence, leaving behind nothing but the scent of wild jasmine and a mind full of what-ifs. As I turned back to the bar, I caught sight of Jenna across the room. She was standing beside Michael, laughing at something he said, her hand lightly resting on his chest like she belonged there, like I'd never existed. For a moment, rage threatened to bubble up, but then I felt the weight of the card in my pocket and smiled. The game had begun. There's something seductive about secrets. Maybe it's the power of holding something no one else knows, or maybe it's the intimacy of sharing it with just one other person. Either way, by the time I texted Allison the next morning, I already knew we were past the point of innocent banter. Her reply came within minutes. Allison, didn't think you'd actually text. I like surprises. Meet me at Espresso Luna, 4th and Pine. 2 p.m. Don't be late. She didn't use an emoji. That made me like her even more. Espresso Luna was a tucked-away cafe, artsy and overpriced, filled with people who wore glasses they didn't need and wrote screenplays they'd never finish. She was already there when I arrived, black leather jacket, aviators, and her red hair pulled back into a loose braid that exposed the curve of her neck. She didn't stand to greet me, just looked up over her coffee and said, "You're early." I like that. I sat across from her, and for a moment, we didn't say anything. She took a sip, then raised an eyebrow. "You don't strike me as a man who does things without a reason. I could say the same about you." She smirked. Touché. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was loaded, like a fuse that had just been lit. "I'm curious," she said, finally. "Is this some kind of subtle rebellion? Sleeping with the CEO's daughter because your wife cheated with the CEO?" I didn't flinch. "Who said anything about sleeping together?" "Please," she scoffed. "You don't text a woman the day after a gala just to talk about weather patterns." She wasn't wrong, but I also didn't want to give her everything too soon. So I leaned forward. "What if I told you I just enjoy your company?" She laughed softly, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "I'd say you're full of shit, but in a charming way." I smiled. "Fair." She took another sip and studied me, eyes scanning my face like she was trying to decode something. "You're angry, not just annoyed. Hollowed out angry. But you're too composed to let it show. Are you a therapist now?" "No," she said, tilting her head. "I just recognize it. You've got that slow burn kind of rage. It's dangerous. Should I apologize?" She shook her head. "No, I think I might be into it." That was the moment I realized I was in over my head. She leaned in then, close enough that her breath warmed the space between us. "So what's your play, Luke?" she asked, voice low. "Seduce me to get back at Daddy? Or are you just lonely and horny, and I happen to be convenient?" Her words weren't accusatory. They were surgical. She wanted to see if I'd flinch. Instead, I told her the truth. "Maybe I came into this with a plan," I said. "But you're making it hard to stick to it." She smiled slowly. "Good." We started seeing each other regularly after that. Always in public at first. Late lunches, rooftop bars, bookstores we never actually read in. It started as a dance of wit and flirtation, but under it, something darker pulsed. An undercurrent of shared dissatisfaction. Neither of us said it aloud, but we were both orbiting the wreckage of our respective lives. Hers, smothered by her father's towering shadow. Mine, shattered by Jenna's betrayal. And yet she made me laugh. Genuinely. She was whip-smart, unfiltered, sometimes brutally so. She hated small talk. Loved thunderstorms. She admitted she sometimes sat in the bathtub fully clothed just to feel a different kind of quiet. She collected vintage perfume bottles. She didn't care what people thought, but craved being understood. We were in the middle of a rainstorm one afternoon, sitting in my car parked at the overlook above Puget Sound. The windows were fogged, and jazz played low on the speakers. She wore an oversized sweater, no makeup, her legs tucked beneath her. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she said suddenly. I hesitated. Then, "I used to think I was boring." She looked at me like I just confessed to murder. "You?" I nodded. I thought being stable meant being invisible. Safe meant predictable. And I thought that's what women wanted. She stared for a moment, then leaned across the console and kissed me. It wasn't slow or cautious. It was hungry. She climbed over the center, straddling me, her hands in my hair, mouth on mine, and suddenly the air in the car felt thick, electric. Her sweater slipped off one shoulder, revealing a black bra strap. Her fingers trailed down the front of my shirt, nails grazing skin. My breath caught as she whispered against my mouth, "Still think you're boring?" I pulled her closer, and for the next 10 minutes, we didn't say another word. We didn't sleep together that day, but not because we didn't want to. It was restraint. Tension, the kind that makes you ache with anticipation. By the time she climbed back in her seat and fixed her hair, her lips were swollen and her cheeks flushed. She looked at me with that familiar smirk and said, "You've got layers, Luke." I like layers, and I was starting to realize something uncomfortable. I like her too. That hadn't been part of the plan. Worse, I was beginning to forget what the plan even was. There's a distinct kind of silence that follows betrayal. Not the kind that screams, not the kind that slams doors or shatters plates, but a quiet that curls under the skin like a toxin. Jenna had brought that silence into our home weeks ago, and I had learned to stop asking about it. But now she wasn't the only one with secrets. It started subtly, of course. The glances across the dinner table were different. She would catch me smiling at nothing, lost in thought, phone face down just a second too late. She noticed when I came home late and didn't offer excuses. Not angry, not accusatory, just watching. And I let her. I let her feel what I had felt. One night, I got home from seeing Allison. Nothing happened, not officially. Just drinks at her place, sitting too close on a velvet couch, our knees brushing like promises waiting to be made. She had leaned into me when she laughed, and I'd inhaled the faint scent of her perfume, jasmine and smoke. Her fingers had rested on my thigh for a breath too long. We didn't cross the line, but we painted all around it. When I stepped into the house, Jenna was waiting in the kitchen, leaning against the island in a silk robe that clung just enough to remind me she used to seduce me with it. Her hair was down, her bare shoulder glowing under the soft pendant lights. "You're late," she said simply. I didn't realize I had a curfew. She didn't laugh. "I made dinner. It's cold now. Sorry," I said, though I wasn't. "I had a thing." "A thing," she repeated, folding her arms. Silence pulsed between us. Then she tilted her head, watching me closely. "You've changed." I raised a brow. "That's a little rich coming from you." "Don't start," she snapped, her voice sharper than she meant. "I'm serious. You've been distant, distracted, cold even. Histoire de hair." The hypocrisy burned like whiskey in my throat. "Cold, distant? How long have you known Michael?" I asked calmly. The color drained slightly from her face. She covered it with a scoff. "He's my boss." That wasn't the question. She blinked. "I don't know what this is about, but I saw you," I said. She stopped. Completely. Her hands froze midair. Her mouth slightly open, no words forming. I stepped forward slowly. 2 weeks ago. Your office. His hands in your hair. Yours on his chest. The way you kissed him like he was the man you came home to. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I kept my voice level precise. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rage or storm in or throw the lunch I brought you across the floor like a fucking cliche. I just watched. Then I left. She looked like she'd been slapped. "Luke, you don't get to say my name like that. Not after you moaned someone else's in a glass office like no one could see you." Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't care. "Not yet." "Why didn't you say anything?" she whispered. "Because I wanted to know who you really were," I said. "I wanted to see how long you'd keep coming home and pretending everything was fine. I wanted to see if you'd lie to my face." "And you did. Every fucking day." She took a trembling breath. "It didn't mean anything." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Don't insult us both with that bullshit. I made a mistake." "No, interrupta. A mistake is dropping a glass. A mistake is taking the wrong exit. What you did was a choice. A repeated, deliberate choice." She looked at me then, truly looked, and for the first time in months, there was no pretense in her expression. Just shame. Just fear. I could have ended it right there. But I didn't. Because I wasn't finished. "You think I'm going to storm out now? Yell, and pack a bag? You'd probably prefer that. Makes it easy. No, I'm going to stay. I'm going to let this rot between us for a little while longer. Let fester, just like you let it happen." She looked sick. And then, softly, she said, "You've been seeing someone." It wasn't a question. I met her gaze. Said nothing. Her chin trembled. "Who is she?" I smiled faintly. "Now you know how it feels." Her eyes darkened, full of panic now, jealousy seeping through the cracks in her composure. "Is it someone I know?" "I didn't ask you for details, Jenna," I said. "I didn't ask how many times, or where, or what positions he likes. I could have, but I didn't, because I already know enough. You're trying to hurt me." "No, irrevolia coldly. I'm showing you how it feels." We stared at each other in the dim kitchen, the place we used to share late-night wine and whispered laughs. Now, it felt like the aftermath of a war no one had the courage to admit started long before the first shot was fired. She sank into a chair, her face in her hands, shaking. I didn't comfort her. Instead, I walked upstairs, closed the door behind me, and lay on the bed we used to share. Allison's name was already glowing on my phone. "Allison, drinks again Friday?" Or something a little stronger. I stared at the message. This was no longer just about revenge. Something else was unraveling now. Something deeper and dangerous. I tapped back. Me. Something stronger. I hadn't intended to fall into Allison's life, and I sure as hell hadn't expected her to fall into mine. But what started as a perfectly aimed act of vengeance was spiraling into something much more tangled. And now, it wasn't just my story cracking open. It was hers, too. Allison didn't text me the night after Jenna and I had our confrontation, which surprised me. She wasn't usually the type to go quiet. When I woke up, her name still hadn't lit up my phone, and for the first time in weeks, I felt off, unsettled. So I waited until mid-afternoon when a single text finally came through. Allison, need to talk. Your place? That was all. No es music. No te sin keep. Just direct. She arrived 20 minutes later. No makeup, hair tied in a low, messy knot. She wore jeans and a white tank top under a loose cardigan. She looked raw, unguarded, and her eyes, normally blazing with challenge, looked hollow. The moment I opened the door, she stepped inside without a word, dropped her bag, and collapsed onto my couch. I stood for a moment, watching her. You okay? She didn't answer right away. Just stared at the ceiling, chest rising and falling as if she'd sprinted here. Then finally, I found out about him. My heart stuttered. Michael, she clarified, without looking at me. My dad. He sat beside her. Not close, not touching, but near enough for her to feel I was listening. He always had his secrets, she continued. I knew that. I grew up in the shadow of his goddamn empire. I was never enough for him. Never impressive enough. I didn't go to Stanford. I didn't climb corporate ladders. I didn't kiss the rings of his executive board. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. I thought at least he respected me, even if we didn't get along. I swallowed, my pulse thrumming. What happened? She let out a bitter laugh. You're gonna love this. I was at the office. Dropped by for lunch, unannounced. Caught Jenna coming out of his private suite. Hair disheveled. Lipstick smudged. She looked like she'd just been used. I didn't respond, because there was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like confirmation. I followed her out, she continued. Watch her adjust her blouse in the elevator mirror. I knew. I fucking knew. She turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw the hurt underneath her usual edge. Did you know? Her voice was quiet but sharp, like a blade being slowly drawn across skin. I nodded once. Her eyes narrowed. How long? Since the day I brought her lunch to the office, I said. I saw them. I didn't confront her. I didn't confront him. Not right away. She blinked. The pieces clicked together in her head. Oh my God, she murmured. That's why you came to the gala. That's why you approached me. Silence. I didn't deny it. She looked away, jaw tightening. You used me. I started with that intention, I said, steady. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about him. Or her. I don't know whether to slap you or kiss you, she muttered. You could do both, I offered softly. She let out a strangled laugh. Not amused, not angry, just exhausted. God, I was such an idiot. I thought he was above it. My father, Michael fucking Whitmore, the man who lectures me about integrity, about public image. Her hands trembled, and she finally let herself fall sideways against my shoulder. I didn't move, didn't take advantage, just let her stay there. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He always made me feel like I was the disappointment, the messy one, the rebellious daughter. But now I see it. I see who he really is. He's a hypocrite, I said. And worse. She sat up slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. I want to confront him, she said. I need to hear it from his mouth. I'll stand with you. She studied me for a long, tense moment. What? I told you, I said, my voice quiet now. This stopped being about revenge a long time ago. Her gaze flicked down to my mouth, then back to my eyes. And just like that, the tension cracked. No longer just emotional, but physical. She kissed me. Hard. This wasn't a flirtation. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't distraction. This was release. My hands found her hips. Her breath caught as I pulled her closer, the weight of the past weeks finally breaking the dam between us. Her cardigan slipped from her shoulders, bearing smooth skin and soft curves I hadn't dared to touch before. She straddled me on the couch, lips hungry, hands tangled in my hair. But then she stopped, pulled back, forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard. I don't want to do this just because we're broken, she whispered. I don't want to be his consequence. Or her replacement. I ran my thumb gently along her jawline. You're not, I said. You're the only part of this that feels real. She kissed me again, slower this time, deeper, and I knew, in that moment, that no matter how this ended, we weren't walking away from each other clean. Powerful men don't like to lose control, especially not to people they never considered a threat. Michael Whitmore was that kind of man, the type who shook hands with one while reaching for your throat with the other, the kind who built his empire with charm and quiet brutality, always staying clean while others bled in the shadows. And now, for the first time, he saw the pieces slipping. Because of me, because of Allison. It didn't take long for him to notice the change in her. She stopped taking his calls, skipped the company meetings she usually sat through out of politeness. She removed her last name from her public-facing consultancy work, rebranding herself simply as Allison Wolf. A subtle, surgical strike. The real bomb dropped when she canceled the keynote speech he'd invited her to co-host, a token of nepotistic PR. She didn't even respond to the request, just sent a blank email with the subject line, "Not interested." And suddenly, the great Michael Whitmore realized something. His daughter wasn't under his thumb anymore. That was when I got the email. It was a Monday, the kind of gray, rain-drenched Seattle morning where the sky feels like a ceiling about to collapse. I opened my inbox, expecting routine contracts, invoices, marketing approvals. But there it was, flagged as important. Subject, compliance concerns, urgent. Sender, HR department, Westbridge Ventures. The body of the email was bland, corporate, full of careful phrases like potential breach, internal review, and vendor-client boundary violations. Translation, Michael was trying to kill my career. He couldn't touch me directly. I didn't work for him. But my firm had clients connected to his empire. And when your name shows up in a flag report, people start asking questions. Whisper ones. Dangerous ones. I spent the next 48 hours putting out fires I hadn't started. My direct supervisor called a sudden performance review. My access to a few key client systems was temporarily paused. And suddenly, my name, which had always meant steady, reliable, safe, was now laced with a question mark. Michael was cutting lines in the water, trying to drag me down slow. That night, I told Allison everything. She was pacing in my living room, barefoot, her hair wild from stress and movement. He's testing you, she said, trying to see if you'll fold. He's not even subtle. No, she agreed. He never is when he's scared. She stopped pacing, turned to me, eyes wide with something I didn't expect to see in her, guilt. This is my fault, she whispered. No, it's mine. No, she insisted, stepping toward me. If I just stayed quiet, then he wins. I cut in. And Jenna keeps living her double life. And you keep pretending your father isn't a coward in a $1,000 suit. The room was quiet for a long time. Rain tapped against the window like it was waiting for something. Then she said, I want to go public. I looked at her. With the affair, she said. Out him. Let people see who he really is. That's a nuclear option. I'm not afraid to fall out, she said. Not anymore. But your name, your company. She waved her hand. I built my career despite him. Not because of him. I've been living in his shadow long enough. I searched her eyes, and what I saw there wasn't revenge. It was freedom. It was her becoming someone new, right in front of me. Then I'll back you, I said. No matter what happens. She stepped in close, took my hand, and pressed it to her heart. I need you to promise something, she whispered. Anything. When this gets ugly, and it will, don't run. Don't shut me out. I didn't hesitate. I'm here. Her mouth found mine, slow and full of purpose. No hesitation. No games. Her hands slid under my shirt, her fingers tracing my spine like she was learning me by feel. We moved to the bedroom without a word, the rain blurring the windows and the past. Clothes fell in pieces. Breath tangled. Skin met skin. She took control first, hovering over me, her hair falling like a curtain around our faces. Her eyes locked onto mine as she slid against me, slow and aching and deliberate. There was no pretending this time. No games. Just us. Raw and honest. Her moans were soft, threaded with the relief of finally letting go. Mine were whispered into her neck, a mixture of want and something dangerously close to love. Afterward, we lay together in silence, our bodies slick with sweat, our fingers laced like we were anchoring each other to the world. "I've never done this before," she said, voice barely audible. "What? Sex?" She smirked, swatting my chest. "No. I mean, let someone in. Like this." I kissed the top of her head. She turned her face toward me, serious again. "We're burning bridges, Luke." I nodded. "Good. Let them burn." We fell asleep like that, tangled, sore, and whole in a way I hadn't been in years. The next morning, I woke up to another flagged email. But this time, it wasn't about me. It was a tip-off, a leak. Subject: affair allegations. CEO Michael Whitmore. Anonymous sender. And below, 2 photos. Jenna, Michael, wrapped up in each other at some rooftop bar, timestamp dated. Clear. Indisputable. The file name? Whitmore exposed.jpg. I stared at it. The game had changed, and someone had just pulled the trigger. Scandal doesn't explode, it bleeds. First in whispers, then in headlines, then in ruined reputations. By noon the next day, Michael Whitmore's affair was no longer a private cancer. It was a full-blown hemorrhage, leaking across digital media, business blogs, anonymous forums, and every gossip network that fed on corporate hypocrisy like vultures over a fresh carcass. The photos, those photos, made it to the front page of Business Chronicle's gossip affiliate under the headline, "Power Plays or Pillow Talk. CEO Michael Whitmore caught in compromising position with marketing executive Jenna R." They didn't name her fully, but they didn't need to. Within hours, the internet did what the internet does best: connected the dots, filled in the blanks, and burned the bridges. Jenna's name was trending on a local Seattle feed. Michael's PR team scrambled like roaches under light, issuing cold, calculated statements about personal matters being handled privately and ongoing internal reviews regarding employee conduct. But it was too late. The narrative was out of their hands now. I watched it all unfold from my living room, my phone buzzing every few minutes with another article, another leak, another thread dissecting Michael's fall from grace. And Jenna? She'd moved out of our house 3 days ago. She said she needed space, but really, it was because the tension had reached a point where the air itself became a threat. Every word between us had felt like it could shatter glass. She didn't cry when she left. No begging, no apology, just guilt and silence. She hadn't texted since. Good, let her sit in it. But while the world tore into Michael, Allison stayed eerily quiet. She didn't answer my messages that morning, not even when I texted her the link to the breaking article with a single word. "It's happening." Nothing. I didn't hear from her until 6:14 p.m. She knocked on my door. No smile, no clever one-liner. Just her, wrapped in a black trench coat, eyes red like she hadn't slept. The second I opened the door, she walked in and pressed her face into my chest. "Tell me I didn't just destroy everything," she whispered. I closed the door behind her and wrapped my arms around her. "You didn't destroy anything," I murmured. "You exposed a lie." She shook her head against me. "He's panicking, calling me, calling my mother. He left me a voicemail begging me to release a statement, saying it was fake. Doctored. Malicious. He's terrified." I stroke her hair gently. "He should be. But he's still my father," she said, pulling away, eyes glassy. "And even now, even after everything, there's this part of me that remembers when he taught me how to ride a bike, when he helped me sneak beer into prom, when he stayed up all night with me after I bombed my first internship interview." She sat on the edge of the couch, her arms wrapped around herself like armor. I don't know how to reconcile the man who tucked me in at night with the one who fucked his employee behind his wife's back. "You sat beside her. You don't have to reconcile it." She looked at me, silent. "Sometimes people fracture," I said. "They become something else. It doesn't erase who they were, but it changes who they are." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I loved him," she whispered. "I just never realized how much until now." I took her hand, threading my fingers through hers. "He doesn't deserve your guilt." "I know," she said, "but that doesn't make it easier." She curled into me, her body trembling slightly. This is going to follow me everywhere, isn't it? Every job, every meeting, every article. I'll always be his daughter. The one who burned it all down. No, I said, kissing her temple. You'll be the woman who stopped pretending. That takes more courage than most people ever find. We stayed there for a while, wrapped in that quiet ache that comes only after you've pulled the pin from the grenade and waited for the dust to settle. Eventually, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from someone I hadn't expected. Jenna, we need to talk. Please, I need to explain. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the screen. Allison saw it. Are you going to answer her? I looked at her, then back at the phone. No, and I meant it, because I wasn't a man clinging to the past anymore. I was standing next to the only person who hadn't lied to me since this all began, even if we started in shadows. Later that night, we sat side by side on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker like nervous stars. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I think I'm going to resign from my father's company. You don't have to, I said. You didn't do anything wrong. I know, but I want a fresh start, something of my own, without him, without the weight of his name. I smiled. I'd follow you anywhere. She looked up at me, those fierce eyes softer now. Then let's burn the rest of it down. Together. There's a moment, just one, when you stop being afraid of the consequences and start craving the truth, no matter how much it costs. For me, that moment came the morning after the scandal broke. I was called into a boardroom at 9 a.m. sharp. Not my firm's boardroom, one of the clients. A powerful one with deep ties to Westbridge, Michael's company. There were 6 people seated at the table when I walked in, all dressed like they'd been vacuum sealed into their suits. Smiles tight, eyes sharper than scalpels. They didn't waste time. Luke, we're concerned, said a man named Harris, VP of Strategy. Your name's been mentioned alongside a number of sensitive developments involving Mr. Whitmore and his personal affairs. I stayed calm. I wasn't aware my name was involved in his personal affairs. A woman beside him cleared her throat. You've been seen in public with his daughter. There's speculation that you may have influenced recent events. Speculation, I echoed. Sounds like gossip to me. They didn't smile. Optics matter, Harris said flatly. We're under pressure from investors. Media attention is bad for business. And, unfortunately, proximity to scandal makes you collateral. This isn't personal. Of course it wasn't. It never was. Are you firing me? I asked. Not quite, he said. But we strongly recommend a temporary separation from certain contracts. We're asking you to voluntarily step back from Westbridge-related projects. Translation, play dead until the fire burns out. I nodded slowly. Then I stood up. I won't be stepping back, I said. Harris blinked. Excuse me? I said no. I repeated. If you want to drop me, do it. But don't expect me to crawl away quietly because I happen to be involved with someone who finally had the guts to call out a predator. You're making this emotional. No, I said. You're trying to make it transactional, and I'm done with that. They didn't argue. They didn't even speak. Just stared. And when I walked out, I knew exactly what I'd just sacrificed. But for the first time in years, I felt free. I texted Allison as I left the building. Me, I just burned a bridge. Feels pretty damn good. She called me immediately. I think I just did the same, she said breathless. I sent my resignation letter. No warning. Just gone. Effective immediately. How do you feel? There was a pause. Like I'm about to throw up, she admitted. Then, after a beat, but also like I can breathe for the first time in years. I laughed. We're really doing this. Yeah, she said, her voice soft. We are. We met for drinks that evening. Not at a bar, not in public. At her place. Her condo was high up in a building overlooking the water. Minimalist, modern, sharp edges softened by warm lighting and the faint smell of vanilla candles burning in corners. She greeted me at the door in a black t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, hair loose and wild. No makeup, no performance. Just her. You sure about this? I asked, stepping inside. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked straight into me and kissed me like she was choosing me. Like the world had offered her 100 paths, and she picked mine anyway. That night, we didn't rush. We didn't tear clothes off like a secret. We took our time. Each kiss was a question. Each touch was an answer. When I undressed her, she stood perfectly still, watching me with eyes full of heat and something deeper, something fragile. Trust. I laid her on the bed like she was something precious, and when I moved inside her, slow and aching, she gasped my name like it was the only anchor she had. We didn't talk for a long time after. We didn't need to. Our bodies said enough. Later, she curled into my chest, tracing slow circles on my stomach. "What now?" she asked, voice quiet. "Whatever we want," I said. She sighed, content. I liked that answer. We fell asleep, wrapped around each other, the city glowing beneath us, the ruins of our old lives drifting like ash through the air. But in the morning, there was a knock at her door, and everything shifted again. She opened it wearing my shirt. Standing in the hallway was Michael Whitmore, disheveled, unshaven, pale in a way that suggested he hadn't slept in days. "Allison," he said. She didn't flinch. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you. Just to talk." "No," she said, voice flat. "You need me to clean up your mess." "But I'm not doing that anymore." His eyes flicked over her shoulder. He saw me, and in that moment, in the wild mix of shock and realization and defeat, I saw a powerful man finally understand what losing everything really looked like. "Get out of my hallway," Allison said. He didn't argue, didn't plead, just nodded once, turned, and walked away. She closed the door, turned to me, exhaled. "That was the last tie," she said. I crossed the room and kissed her, slow and deep. "No," I said, "we're the last tie, and we're not breaking. Rebuilding always begins with wreckage. The world doesn't pause when lives collapse. It just keeps moving, chewing up reputations, swallowing careers, grinding legacies into dust." By the time the dust from the affair had settled, Michael Whitmore was a shell of the man who once towered over boardrooms. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. But I watched it unravel piece by piece, like thread pulled from an expensive suit. First, the board moved quietly, voting to place him on administrative leave while they reviewed internal ethics violations. Then came the resignations. Key executives who had built their entire brands under Michael's leadership began to slither away, each trying to distance themselves from the scandal. The media devoured every inch of it, especially after a second leak dropped. Emails, messages, calendar entries, all tying Michael and Jenna together far longer than anyone had suspected. And somewhere between the outrage and the silence, Jenna came crawling back. It was a Wednesday night when she showed up, unannounced, no warning, just a soft knock on the door of the house she no longer had keys to. I opened it and found her standing in the rain, soaked, hair limp, eyeliner smudged in streaks down her cheeks. "Luke," she said, her voice breaking on my name. I didn't say anything, just stared. She stepped forward. "Please, I didn't know where else to go." She looked different, smaller, not the glamorous, curated woman who had once moved through rooms like she was auditioning for a magazine cover. This was Jenna stripped bare, and for the first time, I realized something. I didn't hate her, but I sure as hell didn't love her anymore. "Why are you here?" I asked. "I lost everything," she whispered. "The job, my friends, the respect of everyone who used to take me seriously." She laughed bitterly. "Do you know what it's like to have your name turned into a meme? To see strangers calling you a whore online while your mother sends you Bible verses over text?" I stayed silent. Because that pain? She'd earned it. She looked up at me, her eyes red. "I made a mistake." "No," I said. "You chose." She stepped closer. "I was lonely, Luke. You were always working, always somewhere else. I didn't feel seen. And instead of saying something, you spread your legs for your boss." She flinched, the words landing like slaps. "Was it worth it?" I asked. "Risking everything? Destroying a marriage? For what? Boardroom sex and champagne lies." "I thought he loved me," she whispered. "And now—" her voice cracked. "Now I see he didn't even respect me." I nodded, then stepped aside, but only enough to block her path. "You're not coming inside." "Luke, please." "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to rewrite this. You don't get to crawl back because the castle you ran to is on fire now." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "Then say it." "I'm sorry," she choked out. "For everything. For hurting you. For lying." for being too selfish to see what I was destroying. I studied her for a long moment. Then I nodded. I accept your apology. She blinked. But that doesn't mean we go back, I added. This isn't some fairy tale where the husband forgives and the wife cries and we kiss under the rain. She laughed once, broken sharp. So that's it. That's freedom, I said. A long silence stretched between us, heavy but clean. Goodbye, Jenna. She turned slowly, walked back down the steps. Her heels clicked against wet concrete, like closing credits. I shut the door and didn't look back. The next morning, Allison and I had coffee on the rooftop of her new office space, a small, boutique firm she joined as a partner just a week before. She looked radiant in a simple white blouse, her freckles visible in the morning sun, her hair pulled into a loose bun. Did she really show up? She asked, sipping her coffee. I nodded. Rain, tears, the whole monologue. Allison smirked, and I told her goodbye. She set her mug down. You sure about that? Absolutely. A pause. Then she reached for my hand. Because you don't owe me anything, Luke. If there's even a part of you that wants to make it work with her. There's not, I said, cutting her off gently. She was the lesson. You're the future. Her eyes softened, and I saw something in them I hadn't seen in a long time from anyone. Belief. And then, almost shyly, she said, I think I love you. My heart thudded once, sharp and full. I squeezed her hand. Good. Because I know I love you. She smiled then, real, wide, vulnerable. And she leaned across the small table and kissed me like the world had finally stopped holding its breath. Below us, Seattle buzzed on. People went to work. News stories changed. Scandals faded. But here, above it all, two people who had once been broken were finally starting something honest. Something built not on revenge, but on something that might finally be called love. Healing doesn't come with a ceremony. There's no parade, no neatly tied bow waiting at the end of betrayal. It comes in the small things, the way the air feels lighter when you wake up, the laughter that catches you off guard, the sense of peace you didn't even realize you were missing until it shows up at your doorstep, barefoot and grinning, holding coffee and hope. It had been 6 weeks since everything fell apart. Michael was out, officially. The board accepted his resignation with an airtight, PR-friendly statement that carefully avoided admitting anything while confirming everything. Rumors swirled that he'd fled the city, maybe Europe, maybe Costa Rica. Allison didn't care. She didn't even check. Jenna disappeared, too. She moved back to California, I heard. No oblivion, just a quiet exit from the life she tried so hard to curate and control. Her Instagram went dark. Friends unfollowed her. And honestly, I didn't feel much of anything about it anymore. Not anger, not sadness. Some wounds don't scar. They vanish. Allison and I moved in together last week. Not out of necessity, not because we were clinging to each other like life rafts. We did it because it felt right. Because every night I spent with her felt like proof that sometimes life gives you second chances in the least expected places, even at the very edge of ruin. The condo was modest. Clean lines. Warm wood. A view that didn't boast, but quietly impressed. She filled it with sunlight and jazz records. I filled it with Sunday mornings, pancakes, and books I'd been meaning to read for years. We were still figuring it out. How to share space, how to fight fairly, how to exist outside the whirlwind of revenge and fallout. But it was honest, and that was new. That was everything. One evening, I came home to find Allison barefoot on the balcony, holding 2 glasses of wine, hair dancing in the wind like she was made of poetry. I've been thinking, she said, handing me a glass. That sounds dangerous. She smirked. I want to leave the city. I blinked. What? Not forever. Just for a while. Maybe 6 months. A year. Go somewhere quiet. Start fresh. No noise. No scandal. Just space. I sipped my wine. Where? Somewhere green, she said. Mountains. Trees. A town small enough to know the barista's name. Big enough not to be suffocating. And what would we do? Whatever we want, she said, her eyes glinting. You consult remotely. I can write consult, maybe open that boutique firm I've been dreaming of, without my last name on the door this time. I looked at her, at the woman who had walked into my life like a blade and stayed like a bomb. Let's do it, I said. Her face broke into a smile, so wide it could have lit up every dark thing we'd been through. Later that night, as we lay in bed, her leg wrapped over mine, the sheets tangled like vines, she whispered, "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" I didn't even need to think. No, not even how it started. I turned to her, brushing a lock of hair from her face. How it started is irrelevant. What matters is how it's going. She nodded. And how's it going? I kissed her. Exactly where I wanted to. We left Seattle in late spring. The new town was tucked between hills and thick pines. Mornings smelled like wood smoke and rain. Neighbors waved. Nobody asked questions. Nobody cared who we had been, only who we were now. We found a cabin just outside town, with creaky floors and a wraparound porch that Allison filled with potted herbs and fairy lights. I turned one of the spare rooms into an office. She turned the other into a studio, where she drafted plans for a new firm with a name she hadn't told anyone but me. Went on long drives, made love without pretense, got into fights about things that mattered, like boundaries and dishes, and always made up before bed. We became ordinary, which, after everything, felt revolutionary. One evening, as the sun bled across the pines, I stood beside her on the porch, arms around her waist. "Did we win?" she asked softly. I thought about it. "No," I said. "Winning implies we were playing their game. So what did we do?" I kissed her shoulder. "We stopped playing.